Can we all join back? We are ready to get going again. I would like to introduce Alafair Burke. She is a past assistant district attorney from Portland, Oregon. She now teaches law at Hofstra University in New York. She is the author of 5 books, with the 6th one coming out next month. March, yes, next month, okay. They are the Samantha Kincaid books, Judgment Calls, Missing Justice and Closed Case, the L.A. Hatcher books, Dead Connection, Angel's Tip, and the new one is 212.
212.
212. 212. All right, very good. And with her is Jen Forbus, blogger and reviewer extraordinaire. You know, the best thing about all these websites is the blogs that they have. Alafair's got one on her site that I read, and I read Jen's. And on good days, I read Joe's.
When he's on his meds?
When he's on his meds, I read his. And they are absolutely wonderful insights into the authors that we all know and love. And we really do need to thank our authors. They give us hours and hours of pleasure. They develop great characters, villains we can learn to hate, and heroes and heroines we learn to love. And I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. We are
That's
thrilled.
sweet.
And the best part of the whole thing is she's here with us today. So, there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm really excited to be here today too because, as Penny said, I'm a blogger. Is it not loud enough?
Pull it up. Pull it up to you.
Pull it up.
Take it up.
It comes out. We could just,
Okay.
there you go.
And I'm a blogger because I'm a fan first, and I am one of Alafair's biggest fans, and I will often joke that I'm her stalker, but I am really thrilled to be here and to be conducting this interview for her. So, to give people a background, if you don't already know Alafair, she grew up with a librarian mother and an English professor father, and so she was always going to the library. Her mom took her to the library every week, but she didn't really always have aspirations to be a writer. She wanted to be a telephone operator, a beautician, and eventually there were aspirations of a Supreme Court justice. So tell us, Alafair, what was the catalyst that got you into writing?
You have done your research. I realize that all that blogging and Facebooking I do, I guess, has consequences that I let slip, that when I was a little kid I wanted to be a beautician, and now it's coming back to haunt me. And yeah, I telephone operator. I forgot about that. So people find it odd, actually, that I wasn't one of those people who grew up thinking I was going to write, and that surprises people because, as Jen mentioned, my mom was a librarian, and my father has written a book or two and has some talent in that area, and was also an English professor. And maybe it was because that was his domain that I went in a different direction, and I was very engaged in policy issues, even as a high school student, and then I wound up going to law school and being a prosecutor. But I always, as a reader, was always an avid reader, and I always loved the crime genre, even before my father, who's James Lee Burke, before he was writing in it. I was the fan of the genre really before he was. So I was always a big reader of mysteries, and I was always very interested in crime. You know, at any given moment, there's some crime story that I'm obsessed with. My current one is Amy Bishop, the professor down in Alabama who shot all her colleagues last week when she was denied tenure, allegedly. So I was always obsessed with crime stories, and that led me to the district attorney's office. And while I was at the district attorney's office, I was still reading the genre, and I would read probably like many of you all. I'd read, you know, more than a book a week. And eventually, kind of two and two fell together for me that I was really working and living in and breathing an atmosphere at the district attorney's office that I really didn't see portrayed very much in crime fiction. There's legal thrillers, which is somewhat of an oxymoron, I think, that are very much courtroom driven, you know, where the lawyer, you know, the protagonist is the defense lawyer who objects and winds up saving the day, like Perry Mason. And then there's a lot of police procedurals, but I didn't see, other than maybe Linda Fairstein's terrific series, I really didn't see a depiction of the prosecutor as the protagonist, and not in court. But the most important work that prosecutors do, in my view, is not in court at all. It's the conversations in the hallways with the defense lawyer. It's the deals cut with police officers, really, about you do this for me on this case and I'll do this for you on that case. And the enormous discretion that prosecutors bring to the process was something I found fascinating in the job, and something I didn't see being portrayed in crime fiction. So I'd read these books where the prosecutors are very cookie cutter. You know, all they did was go to court all the time. I'm like, that's not what we do. And then meanwhile, I was working on some really fascinating cases at the DA's office that maybe we'll talk about. And I started to get in my head a plot for what became my first book. But I guess I became one of those many lawyers out there in the world who was starting to tell myself, you know, someday when I'm able to, I'm going to write a book. And it was kind of loosely based on a couple cases I worked at the DA's office. So I started to think about it, and then when I finally I left the DA's office and moved to New York, and I had a summer off when I was supposed to be studying for the New York bar. And instead I took golf lessons and bought a computer and started what became my first book. And I did pass the New York bar. But yeah, so I started my first book after actually I left the DA's office. But if I hadn't have been a prosecutor, I don't think it would have. I think you have to have something to write about, you know, before you can write. And for me, that job was the beginning of it, at least.
Well, Alafair's just talked about Judgment Calls being her first book, but those weren't actually your first stories, right? Because, you know, I heard this about the case of the cat's missing meow and murder at the roller disco.
So my parents have the unfortunate tendency to talk about me a lot, which is not necessarily a good thing. And then when they talk about me, it's not my current self. They talk about me when I'm like 8, which can lead to kind of humbling stories. But according to them, I would write crime-based stories as a kid that had animals as protagonists. But the only proof I have of this is that I do have a short story that I keep meaning to put on my website, actually, so I can't be that embarrassed about it. I have a copy of a typewritten short story that I wrote in the 5th grade during the height of the roller skating disco era, called Murder at the Roller Disco. And it's remarkably hard-boiled, actually. So I thought it was pretty, I had my mom dig it out, and she mailed it to me. I'm like, oh, this has to go up on my website. But I keep forgetting to do it, so I'm glad you reminded me.
So she's actually the catalyst for her dad, I think. All right, Alafair grew up, for the most part, in Wichita, but she decided that she didn't want to stay there for college, so she headed off to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. What took you all the way to Reed?
I wanted out. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and I didn't want to stay in Kansas for various reasons. And for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to go on the West Coast, and I think it was because I watched too much TV or something. Like, I figured West Coast seemed exciting, so I wanted to go to California, and I got into Berkeley, and I was supposed to go to UC Berkeley, and I didn't get a dorm room. It's still very hard to get a dorm room on that campus because it's a big campus and not so many dorm rooms. And my parents, who had never created rules for me in any meaningful sense, suddenly decided that that was too crazy to move to Berkeley without a dorm room, and they thought that I would join a cult or like wind up selling beads on the street or something, and they prohibited me. I've never been prohibited from anything, and I suddenly got prohibited from going to Berkeley, which is one of the best universities in the country. It is still a debate in my household. It still comes up. My brother, who's 9 years older than I am, is still to this day far more outraged about it than I am. He's like, yeah, Mom and Dad, you really blew it on that one. So I had to find somewhere else to go that was neither Berkeley nor Kansas. So I wound up looking at schools that were still taking applications, and Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which counted as the West Coast as far as I was concerned, counted. So I wound up going there, and I really liked it. It was a little tiny liberal arts college. I don't know if people have heard of it or not.
But that's where you developed your love for Portland, too.
Love Portland, yeah. It's a really nice city. Actually, Milwaukee kind of reminds me of it from what